Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take complex industry analyses and distill them into the knowledge you need fast. Today we're focusing on, well, a really interesting case in the iGaming world, Antigua and Barbuda. It's got this significant history, right? When you talk about online gambling regulation, you pretty much have to start here. Antigua was the world's first jurisdiction to set up a framework way back in 1994. Our sources, based on some really detailed expert research, they show why it's still relevant today. But there's a big but. The data points to this kind of paradox, something we need to tackle right away.
Exactly. That's the core finding from the research, really. Antigua is, let's say, overwhelmingly useful as a licensing jurisdiction. A great place to get licensed if you're an international operator. But, and this is the key thing, it's just not a viable consumer market if you're looking to enter fresh. So our mission today is to kind of unpack the mechanics behind its really powerful zero-tax setup, the whole international business corporation thing, and then explain, using the actual numbers, why trying to target the local Antiguan market itself, it just leads to, well, mathematical financial failure. It just doesn't add up.
Okay, let's unpack this. And starting with that foundation, that sort of pioneering status, the regulatory structure itself. What's the core legal appeal that's kept Antigua in the game for, 30 years now?
Right. So the foundation is the Interactive Gaming and Interactive Wagering Act. There was a key update in 2007, but it builds on that original 1994 law. The regulator is the Financial Services Regulatory Commission, the FSRC. But the real appeal, it's the flexibility. The whole framework is basically designed to attract entities that aren't based there, these international business corporations, or IBCs.
Okay, let's pause right there, IBC. For, someone listening who maybe isn't deep into tax law, what exactly is an IBC in this specific context? Why is it so central to Antigua's offshore model?
Good question. So an IBC, an international business corporation, it's a specific type of company. It's legally set up to do international business, but the key is that all its profit-making activities happen outside the country where it's incorporated, so outside Antigua in this case. And it's this separation where the money's made versus where the company is legally registered. That's the mechanism. That's what allows Antigua to offer those really, really attractive tax benefits we need to talk about.
And what does that mean in practice? Like, do operators need to set up shop physically, move servers and staff to St. John's? No, not at all. And that's, a huge selling point. The framework demands almost no local presence. You don't need a local office, no requirement for local servers. You can run everything remotely. Plus, they allow 100% foreign ownership. Doesn't matter if it's for the interactive gaming license, that's casino slots, or interactive wagering for sports betting. It's all designed for maximum operational freedom for these international players.
Right. And what about the process itself, the timeline, the costs? We know competitors like, say, Curacao or Malta, their costs seem to change quite a bit. How does Antigua stack up? It's a pretty established and clean process. Usually takes about 3 to 6 months start to finish. You have to factor in the background checks. Those take maybe 8 to 12 weeks. Financially, you're looking at a USD 75,000 initial application fee. Then it's USD 50,000 each year to renew. And there's also a USD 100,000 minimum bank guarantee you need to put up, kind of like a security deposit. Now, that $75,000 upfront fee, compared to some of the top-tier EU places, it's actually seen as pretty competitive for a full international license. It puts Antigua in this sort of middle ground, between the super cheap, maybe less credible licenses and the really expensive European ones.
Interesting positioning. And there's another practical point, right? Language. English is the official language.
Yeah.
It must simplify things quite a bit.
Oh, definitely. It streamlines the whole thing, all the compliance documents, the license applications, talking to the regulator, it's all in English. That removes a massive headache compared to dealing with jurisdictions where you need constant translation for everything.
Okay, so that's the structure. Now let's shift gears to what seems like the main event, the zero tax advantage. Our sources really hammer this point home as the single biggest strength.
Yeah, absolutely. For those IBCs we talked about, the tax setup is basically designed to let them keep as much profit as possible. So first, 0% tax on gross gaming revenue, GGR, nothing off the top line. Second, 0% corporate income tax on profits. But, and this is really crucial, that only applies if those profits come exclusively from serving international markets, not Antigua itself. And finally, 0% withholding tax. So when they pay out dividends to owners or interest or royalties, there's no tax withheld on that either.
Okay, let me make sure I understand this. If I set up an IBC in Antigua, but all my customers are, say, in South America and Asia, the revenue I generate from them outside Antigua is taxed at 0% locally. What's the legal thinking behind allowing 0% corporate tax like that?
Yeah, you got it. It goes back to that IBC structure and this idea of a tax nexus, because the actual transactions, the customers, the operational control, it's all happening outside Antigua's borders. So the Antiguan government says, legally speaking, there's no domestic connection, no nexus for that specific revenue. They tax domestic activity, right? But for an IBC serving only offshore markets, its domestic activity is, well, basically zero. So the tax is zero.
That's quite a deliberate legislative strategy, isn't it? Clearly designed to pull in significant international business. But the research is very clear. This huge tax advantage, it completely disappears if an operator thinks about targeting the local Antiguan market.
That's the flip side. And it's absolutely deliberate. It's the essential balancing act. If an operator primarily serves the domestic Antiguan market, they get hit with the standard 25% corporate income tax on their net profits, just like any other local business. It's like a legislative wall. It's there to make sure the IBC structure is used as intended to attract foreign money, but not to let companies avoid tax on profits made from Antiguans. The moment you face that 25% tax, boom, the main reason for being licensed there is gone.
Makes sense. And before we move off tax, what about the players? Do they get taxed on winnings?
Nope. 0% tax for players on their winnings, doesn't matter how much they win, which, adds to the jurisdiction's appeal, especially for potentially high-stakes bettors from around the world. They don't have the hassle of reporting or withholding tax on their end.
So it really paints a picture of a system built for the global industry, not necessarily for serving the local population. Which brings us squarely to that critical reality check section in the analysis. Why, even with this, seemingly great regulatory setup, is Antigua itself just not a viable target market?
Right, this is where the numbers just hit you. It's stark. We're talking about a total population of just 98,179 residents. I mean, think about that from an iGaming operator's perspective. That kind of population size, it just breaks the standard marketing and customer acquisition models.
98,000 total. Wow. Okay, so how many of those are actually active online gamblers? What's the user base look like?
It's incredibly small. The research figures point to only about 2,800 individuals being active online gamblers. That's like, what, a 2.9% participation rate? Tiny. And the total size of that domestic online market, also tiny, just USD $3.2 million annually for the entire country's online gambling spend.
Okay, 3.2 million total market. Now let's put that next to the operating costs we talked about earlier. The license fees, the guarantee, this is where the math gets ugly. Right.
Exactly. Ugly is a good word for it. The annual fixed costs just to operate a licensed entity there, fees, the guarantee, compliance staff, basic tech infrastructure. The conservative estimate is somewhere between USD 540,000 and maybe USD 900,000 minimum per year. So just to break even, right, just to cover your basic costs from domestic operations alone, you'd need to somehow capture nearly 20 to 30% of that entire $3.2 million market.
Which sounds unlikely, especially given the existing competition.
It's functionally impossible. Yeah. The sources are clear. That tiny domestic market, it's already dominated. There are 3 established international operators who together control something like 60% of that 3.2 million pot. So if you're a new company coming in, even if you somehow manage to grab, say, a 10% market share, which would be tough, you're looking at maybe $320,000 in annual revenue. Meanwhile, your costs are over $500,000 minimum. You'd just be bleeding money year after year.
Right.
So the conclusion in the research.
That's blunt. Targeting the domestic market is completely unviable.
Right. Even the idea of using it as maybe a small test market, try things out before going global, the numbers suggest even that doesn't fly because the financial drag is just too severe. Correct. And on top of that, the local player preferences add another hurdle. Like 78% of the gambling happens on mobile. Okay, that's common now, but there's this really strong cultural preference for cricket betting. It makes up 58% of all sports betting volume. So unless you're specifically geared up for mobile first and have a really strong cricket offering, you're facing another uphill battle for a market that's just too small to justify the effort.
So the picture is crystal clear. Antigua is a place to get a license primarily for tax reasons to serve other markets. It's not a market itself.
Okay.
But if the license is purely for international reach, how strong is that license value today compared to, say, Malta or Curacao?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? That first mover advantage they had back in '94, it's definitely eroded over time. Antigua faces some serious competition now. You've got Malta, which offers that connection to the European Union. That means better banking relationships generally, more institutional credibility, especially if you're targeting European players. And then you have Curacao, which is often seen as Faster, maybe cheaper, less red tape to get licensed. So it attracts operators who are really prioritizing speed to market and lower setup costs. Antigua's kind of stuck in the middle there, and this sort of declining edge, it's made worse by some risks tied to the actual physical infrastructure on the island.
Okay, tell me more about that infrastructure risk. It's not just about internet speed, is it?
No, it's more systemic than just speed. I mean, the speeds are okay. Average fixed broadband is around 45 millidps, mobile 4G about 28 millidps. Adequate, maybe, but not exactly cutting edge. The real vulnerability is the hurricane season, June through November. It's a fact of life there. And it causes pretty regular network outages, could be hours, could be days. Now, if you're running critical servers, processing, potentially millions in bits per hour, those outages, that's direct financial loss. It's service interruption, unhappy customers. So operators basically have to build in robust, fully redundant hosting solutions located far away from the island anyway, which just adds more cost and complexity.
And there's that other friction point mentioned, the financial side. Operating a business based in the Caribbean, specifically getting payments processed. That sounds like a constant headache.
Oh, it definitely can be. Caribbean merchants often face higher processing fees from the big international card networks, Visa, MasterCard. We're talking maybe 3.5% up to 5.5%, sometimes higher. That's because the region is often perceived as higher risk, maybe less developed banking systems locally. And on top of higher fees, they often face higher rolling reserves, where the processor holds back a bigger chunk of your money, say 10%, 15% for longer periods. That really eats into your cash flow and your profit margins. It makes finding stable, low-cost payment processing harder unless you work with very specialized providers who know the region well.
Okay, finally, and this feels like maybe the most critical point for anyone listening who's considering this route, the legal risk. Let's say an operator gets this Antigua zero tax license. What actual protection does that license give them if they start serving customers in places with really strict local rules, like certain U.S. states or parts of Europe?
Yeah, this is crucial. The short answer is zero protection. Absolutely none. An Antigua license only gives you regulatory permission within an Antigua and Barbuda. If you're taking bets from players in, say, a U.S. state that requires its own state license or an EU country like Germany that demands a local permit, your Antiguan license means nothing to them. It doesn't make you legal there. And it potentially exposes the operator, even its directors, to prosecution in that target market. And we have to remember, extradition treaties exist. Antigua has them with major markets, the US, the UK, Canada. So the real risk isn't determined by where your license is from. It's determined by where your customers are and whether that place accepts your license. Increasingly, major markets don't. So the license, it's really become more of a flag of convenience, primarily for the tax benefits. It's definitely not a shield against regulatory enforcement in the markets you actually serve.
Right. That really brings everything together then. Antigua, a true pioneer in licensing, offers this incredibly attractive zero-tax structure if you use the IBC model correctly. But it is purely, absolutely a tax and licensing strategy. The data just screams that it cannot sustain any kind of domestic operation.
Precisely. It's a fantastic setup for international operators who need a reputable, very tax-efficient base to serve global markets from. But this whole situation, it raises a much bigger sort of strategic question about the future of this entire offshore licensing model, doesn't it? I mean, think about it. You have major global markets increasingly demanding local licenses to operate legally. They're cracking down on companies serving their citizens without those local permissions. So you have to ask, how much longer can this zero-tax offshore IBC model really hold its value, especially for the bigger operators who need that institutional credibility, who need access to those regulated markets? What's going to be the next big selling point for these smaller licensing jurisdictions when just offering zero tax isn't enough anymore to guarantee access to the players everyone wants? That's the real challenge ahead.
That is indeed the fundamental strategic question facing not just Antigua, but all offshore hubs today. A really fascinating, complex, and as we've seen, highly constrained iGaming environment in Antigua and Barbuda. This has been The Deep Dive.